Welcome everybody. I hope you're doing well. It's a rainy March day here in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, and we're hoping March goes out like a lamb, and then we don't have any more snow. But you never know in Minnesota. Before I introduce our awesome guest today, I just wanted to welcome all of you to our Washington update. What does the American Rescue Plan mean for Midwestern states and the country? I think we have a nice size group, so we should be able to have a good discussion. I think around 30 to 40 people registered. And it looks to me like we've got representation from every one of our states and then some other folks too, which is wonderful. Just a couple ground rules, and Katie and Mary, please correct me if I miss anything. But this session will be recorded, and I know that a number of our legislators have not been able to make it, and so they'll be able to access this recording as well as Tom's slides after the presentation. If you have a question, please pose it in the chat. You can also raise your hand, but the chat's a lot easier because then we can read it and kind of answer in sequence. And Katie and Mary have asked all of us voluntarily to mute ourselves if we're not speaking, or they'll mute us. So I'm always in favor of mute thyself before you get muted by somebody else. At the end, instead of, I think our preference would be, since Tom won't speak too long, to leave our time at the end for questions and discussion. This really is not intended to be formal. It's a discussion with you. A lot of these questions came up during our state visits. We've done about a third to half of our visits with states so far. And these visits are, of course, not in person. They're virtual this year. But they've been really fun and we've learned a lot. And so a bunch of questions came up, particularly on our last visit with North Dakota last week. And we thought, let's put something together quickly, which is this opportunity today. We only had about a week to get it set up, but Tom is well prepared. So just to introduce Tom, he's familiar to many of you, but Dr. Tom Harnish joined SHEO, or the State Higher Education Executive Officers. A number of you are SHEO officers, and I was one of those folks once. He's Vice President for Government Relations. Dr. Harnish is located in Washington, D.C., where his primary leadership responsibility is planning, implementation, and coordinating SHEO's portfolio of federal relations, policy, communication, and advocacy work. He monitors new and potential federal action, legislation, rules, and other policies in action, and there's a lot of action right now going on that have relevance for our membership. Dr. Harnish is responsible for bringing these issues to the attention of the SHEO staff and SHEO's membership, and for articulating their potential impact on our members and the institutions and students that they serve. Tom recently worked at the American Association of State Colleges and Universities, ASCU, better known to some of you. He also worked in the research department here at the Compact a number of years ago, and most importantly, he is a Midwesterner from Wisconsin originally. So with no further ado, Tom, welcome.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you for MEC for setting this up. And I always have a soft spot in my heart for MEC. They were gave me my first opportunity during grad school, my first professional opportunity. It got me started in higher education, and I've been so grateful for all the friendships and the mentorships that they have provided to me over the years. So thank you all for tuning in today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. I have plenty of time on my hands now that I picked the Wisconsin Badgers to win all the NCAA tournament, so I don't have to watch basketball anymore. But that prediction of my home state's team didn't quite pan out. So be happy to take any of your questions on these issues. So I'm going to share my screen right now, and okay, so it should be up. And I can go into view mode. Slideshow. So I'd like to give a quick federal update about the American Rescue Plan that was signed earlier this month by President Joe Biden. It's a $1.9 trillion relief package. It's wide ranging. It covers a whole variety of topics. I'm going to talk about a sliver of those topics today, mainly the aid directly to institutions of higher education, as well as the aid to state and local governments. So Susan talked about SHEO. SHIO is a national organization based in Boulder, Colorado, and we have our DC office here. We're the National Association of Statewide Governing Policy and Coordinating Boards of Post-Secondary Education and their staff. We've been on the scene in American higher education for over 66 years, and we are committed to equitable educational opportunities, regardless of one's race, ethnicity, gender, or socioeconomic factors. So this American Rescue Plan, $1.9 trillion package, it includes new investments in higher education, institutions of higher education, over $350 billion to state and local governments. It also includes investments in broadband and in SNAP benefits that will help students. There's a lot of discussion now about students and food insecurity, and this package includes, along with the previous packages, aid to help those students meet their basic needs. So just a quick rundown, the $350 billion, the $400 billion to institutions, the SNAP benefits, the broadband internet. There's two other issues that I'll bring up quickly here that are related to higher education. One is that this bill closes the 90-10 loophole. And what this means is that for-profit colleges, there is a rule on the books that no more than 90% of their revenue can come from federal Title IV financial aid. So those are your grants and your student loans and the like. But that did not include GI Bill benefits. So there were many instances of for-profit colleges engaging in unscrupulous behavior and predatory behavior toward members of the military and veterans trying to recruit them to their colleges. So this bill includes a provision that includes those GI and military benefits in the 90-10 calculation. For many of these for-profit colleges, they come right up to that threshold of 90%. So they always, they go out and look for other sources of revenue. And in the past, that has come through GI Bill benefits. So that this bill closes that 90-10 loophole, including those GI Bill benefits in the 90-10 calculation. And then second, another policy provision that's in the American Rescue Plan is that it blocks forgiven or canceled student loan debt from the federal government as taxable income over the next 5 years. So for some people, they will have their loans forgiven. We have programs such as the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, which people who are in public service, public or the nonprofit sector, make 10 years of payments based on the income-based repayment plan. And after that, their loans are forgiven. So for some people, though, there's a substantial amount of loans that are forgiven, and that could be considered taxable income. They could get a big tax bill. For the next 5 years, in this because of this new law, that is going to be not considered taxable income. There's also discussion about what's known as borrower defense to repayment. So this is a federal provision where people can have their loans forgiven if they show that their institution engaged in misconduct or broke a law, and that there's been over 100,000 cases of borrower defense brought to the U.S. Department of Education. Miguel Cardona just made news the other day, the new Secretary of Education, that he will forgive 72,000 cases of borrower defense at a price tag of $1 billion. But that those forgiven student loans for the next 5 years will not be considered taxable income. So those are just a few of the higher education provisions, and now I'll start to dig into them. So the $350 billion to state and local governments. This is something that SHIO advocated for. I know that states are in uneven fiscal positions right now. Some states are in better, some states are in worse. The states that we've seen that are in the most difficult circumstances right now are the states that are most reliant on revenue extraction. such as oil and gas states, states like Alaska, very dependent on oil and gas revenue, as well as states that are dependent on tourism dollars and hospitality. So states like Nevada, Hawaii, those states we're lining up at least for double-digit budget cuts to higher education, budget cuts that would define higher education probably for the rest of the decade. So for all states, this package will be very useful to help them with their budget situations. But for some states, it will be a real lifeline. So, but we have seen certainly fiscal conditions improve in the latter half of 2020. But some states are still in very difficult financial situations. So the $350 billion is broken down, $219 billion to states and DC, $130 billion to local governments, $10 billion for coronavirus project fund, and then $2 billion to local assistance and tribal consistency fund. The uses of this $350 billion are in the law. You can see it on page 223 of the law, but it's fairly open. So as long as you can connect it to the list of uses below. Two things though that you cannot use this fund for are for pensions or tax cuts. So that is pretty clear in the law that you cannot use $350 billion for pensions or tax cuts. It includes an extended runway, so this is not a situation where you have to spend all the funds within a year. All the funds must be spent on costs incurred on or before December 31st, 2024. So that is the $350 billion. The state, how it's going to be divvied up is states, this is the $219 billion, so states will receive $195 billion. There's going to be $25 billion of that will be distributed evenly among the states and DC, and then $168 billion of that will be distributed based on the state's share of unemployed workers in the latter half of 2020. So that's sort of the breakdown of how that money will be distributed. The local fiscal relief funds, so some of it will go to counties, some of it will go to cities, some will go to non-entitlement units of government. So that's the local, state and local funding. And then there's also a capital projects fund, so $10 billion for capital projects, and then that they can use for projects enabling work, education, and health monitoring in response to COVID-19. And then local assistance and tribal consistency fund. So that is the breakdown of the over $350 billion that will go to state and local governments in this. This will stabilize state budgets for higher education. Higher education has traditionally been one of those items that's been, when states are in difficult budget situations, it's one of those first items to be cut in state budgets. So this either directly or indirectly will be a benefit to higher education. So this is just the latest from Grapevine. So this Grapevine has just put out data on state fiscal support for higher education. So I'll provide these slides after the presentation so you can see how your state stacks up as far as percent change for fiscal support for higher education. But you can see the states, of course, over the last year. Again, this is only to FY20. This is to FY21, but you can see states are in different positions as far as how much year-over-year increases or decreases they've made to higher education budgets. And then it also needs to you also need to factor in state fiscal the fiscal relief that was in the CARES Act funds. So this includes the CARES Act funds through the GEAR program. So I know last year at the presentation, I talked about the GEAR funding. So that was the money to governors that they could spend on higher ed or K-12. So some of them did indeed spend the money on higher education. And so they have broken that out so you can see how much was spent on how much they devoted to higher education through that GEAR fund. Okay. And that is available if you just Google Grapevine, Illinois State University. You'll be able to see the latest data for state fiscal support for higher education. The SNAP benefits. So there has been expansion of SNAP benefits for college students. Over the last several years, there's been a very good discussion in higher education about student hunger, as well as student housing insecurity. This is something that I think is a long overdue discussion. It's something that I think has been hiding in plain sight. So the new eligibility for SNAP benefits, traditionally, many college students haven't been eligible for SNAP benefits, but now college students are eligible if they have an expected family contribution of 0, so low income student, as well as they are eligible for federal or state work study. In the past, they had to be participating in federal or state work study. Now they just need to be eligible for federal or state work study. So the U.S. Department of Education, Miguel Cardona, the Secretary of Education, just put out a press release last week that they are working with the USDA to conduct outreach to students and to conduct outreach to institutions to let them know and let the students know about their eligibility for SNAP benefits. Broadband internet. So this is something certainly that affects students, and I'm glad to see that this is getting more attention in the press. So there's more money for emergency, what's known as the emergency broadband benefit. So $50 per month subsidy, $75 per month subsidy in tribal lands, but that now includes Pell Grant students. So there's a whole list of ways to be eligible for this emergency broadband benefit. This is a subsidy that goes to internet service providers, not directly to the students, but it goes to the provider, and the provider can seek reimbursement for this subsidy. But it includes $6 billion in new funding, and the details of this are currently being worked out. The FCC traditionally has not worked with the Department of Education, so they're working together on how they can get the word out about this and how they can work together to let college students know about their eligibility for Pell Grant students, let them know about their eligibility for this emergency benefit. So low-income students now will be eligible. Low-income college students now will be eligible for an emergency broadband benefit subsidy to help them access the internet. So now I'll go to the aid that goes directly to institutions. So there is $36 billion. There's nearly $40 billion through the HERF fund. So this bypasses states. This goes directly to institutions from the U.S. Department of Education. So $40 billion through the HERF fund. $36 billion will go to public and nonprofit institutions of higher education based on a formula. $3 billion will go to HBCUs, HSIs, and minority-serving institutions. 400 million will go to for-profit colleges, and 200 million to institutions with the greatest needs. So that's kind of the breakdown of the $40 billion. How this will be distributed. This will be distributed based on a formula, the same formula that they had in the December relief package. So 37% for FTE based on enrollment of federal Pell Grant recipients, 37% based on headcount enrollment of Pell recipients. So just the background on this is that during the CARES Act, the first big package that passed, there were concerns about using FTE enrollment as in the distribution formula because a lot of community college students attend part-time, and so they would not be counted as much as a full-time of full-time students. So to include those part-time students, they wanted to include headcount. So they sort of split the difference on headcount versus FTE. So this is the formula of how the money to public and nonprofit institutions will be distributed. And so here's just a breakdown of the allocation. This is just a screenshot. The American Council on Education, and I can put it into the chat bar if you'd like. When we're done here, I can has put together a simulation estimates of what each institution should receive through the American Rescue Plan. So these are your public and nonprofit institutions. ACE has also put together a list of for-profit institutions in your state. The breakdown of this is you can see the simulated total allocation here on the right-hand side. For this American Rescue Plan and the money that's going to go directly to institutions, half of this needs to be spent on grant aid to students for your public and nonprofit colleges. So you can just take the number that you see on the right-hand side and cut it in half, and that's the minimum amount that needs to be spent on student grants. Okay. For-profit colleges, all of the money needs to be spent on student grants. So the institutions are essentially just being used as a pass-through. Key provisions of institutional aid. So this is very similar to the December package. Lost revenue, reimbursements for expenses already incurred, technology costs, faculty, staff training, payroll, making additional grants to students. They must use a portion of their allocation for implementing evidence-based best practices for the coronavirus, as well as conducting a direct outreach to financial aid applicants about the opportunity to receive a financial aid adjustment. So for some students who their parents may have lost a job, we want to make sure that they know that they can appeal to their financial aid office in order to have their financial aid adjusted to reflect their new circumstances. Now, the big question that I received about this package is, well, what do you mean by lost revenue? And so we forward our questions on to the department. The department has put out, last week, put out guidance on what is considered lost revenue. So this is just a screenshot of their response. They put out an FAQ document. I'm happy to share that with you. That gets into the details about what is considered lost revenue under this program. One thing that is not listed here and that I am working to find out is state budget cuts and whether that would be included as a potential lost revenue in the HERF grant program. So I would stay tuned on that, and hopefully we should be hearing back from the department on that. So that's been a very popular question about what is considered lost revenue. With this lost revenue, I would just say that it has to be, again, sources of lost revenue associated with the coronavirus pandemic. So it has to be associated with the pandemic. And then you also need to show your math. So if you had $50 million that you received for your tuition and fee charges, and now you're at $40 million, you need to show them that math. And then you can say, hey, that $10 million is considered lost revenue due to the coronavirus. So showing it over the years, saying that what the differential is due to coronavirus. Okay. Again, 50% of the funds need to be distributed to students. Need to prioritize needy students, but no student eligibility requirements. It can go to students in exclusively distance ed programs. And then with DACA undocumented international students, we don't have an answer yet on whether those students will be eligible for the aid. That is, they're working through that, not only at the Department of Education, but also with the Department of Justice, because there is a law dating back from the 1990s about eligibility for benefits for undocumented people. So we will have to just wait and see whether whether undocumented DACA or international students will be eligible for that student grant aid. There are provisions where you cannot, either lost revenue or otherwise, that you cannot use this institutional aid for, and those are listed below. I've received some questions about capital projects, so I'm going to forward that in the series of questions that we have to the department. I'm not entirely sure about what the parameters are on capital projects. It does say capital outlays related to certain facilities. So we will have to see if there is some opportunities for capital projects. Again, we will have to see about that. Magnets of effort. So there's been a lot of talk about magnets of effort on this. And this is, again, something where I'm trying to find out more information from the department. So what are magnets of effort provisions? Magnets of effort provisions are provisions in federal law requiring states to maintain funding at a certain level. So this is designed so that states don't take the federal dollars and use them to supplant state dollars. So you want them to try to states to maintain a minimum threshold of funding and not use those federal dollars to supplant state aid. These provisions are often included. I just remember from the stimulus package a decade ago, they had several MOE requirements, and states literally spent down to the dollar in some instances about regarding MOE. So the institutions of higher education, and this is a key point, the institutions of higher education are going to get the money regardless of what state spending is on higher education, K-12 or whatever. That money is going directly from the Department of Education to institutions of higher education. It's going to bypass states. So the institutions are going to get that money regardless of what states do. Now, this a part of the rescue package that I didn't talk about is K-12 funding. So there's substantial funding for K-12 funding in this relief package. In order to receive that K-12 funding, you have to meet the magnets of effort requirements. And the magnets of effort requirements include both K-12 and higher education funding. So the magnets of effort provision is listed below. You must maintain spending on both K-12 and higher ed in FY22 and FY23, at least at the proportional levels relative to the state's overall spending averaged over FY18, 19, and 20. So that is the minimum provision. And what's a little different in this bill as opposed to the previous bills is that in the previous two packages, you'd have to make an argument to the Secretary of Education that your state had a precipitous decline in funding. And that was a reason that you could get an exemption from the magnets of effort. For this one, the Secretary can waive a state magnets of effort for any reason or no reason at all. So the Secretary has full power to waive this requirement for state magnets of effort requirements. I don't know, what how aggressively they're going to enforce this. We haven't had a conversation with them on that. There are still questions about this and how the calculation is going to go. We have had some initial back and forth with the department, but one of the key questions that I've had, and I know I've received this from other people, is whether K-12 and higher education funding are going to be bundled together into a single number, or whether K-12 and higher ed funding are going to be separately, whether you kind of have to check both boxes as far as their proportional level of funding. So I would just say stay tuned on magnets of effort. Hopefully we'll have answers from the department soon on how they're going to go about calculating that. So I have my SHIO emails. If you're interested, we have a daily email on higher education policy. Feel free to sign up. And with that, I will be happy to answer any questions. And I'll provide this PowerPoint. I'll send this over to the MEC team so you can have it, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. That was great. And I think, there's still some questions that remain, but you hit on the big ones here. I think one of the points that Tom raised is that I think even later today, you're going to be speaking with the Department of Education folks and later this week. So if folks do have questions or suggestions, certainly you could pose those today, or we could send them Tom's way later in the week. Is that correct, Tom?
Yeah, we put out a call from to the SHIO community about questions that folks might have, and we received many from throughout the country. So we are actually putting together a document that we will be sending over to the Assistant Secretary for Post-Secondary Education, hopefully tonight. So, but if you have any questions that you'd like to see included in there, please let me know and I can include them.
And I just I see Rob's on the call here. Rob, thank you for giving us access to Tom, and we just are grateful for your allowing us to kind of piggyback on some of your efforts. Thank you. We're a unique organization in that we represent state folks, policymakers, as well as higher education leaders. And so what's great about this is that there's there are aspects of this that benefit the state at the state level, of course, and at the institution level. I think just from what I'm hearing, getting clarity about the bundling of K-12 and higher ed, in some states, like in Minnesota, there's a state agency for higher education and there's a state agency for K-12. So that coordination, would probably be very simple, right? Or simpler. In some states, the setup is very, very different. So I think getting some clarity on that bundling would be great. Because I know that that's a question that's come up a couple of times during our virtual state visits. Folks wanting to know, how's the money going to be let out? And then what's the accountability? And then will we have a longer period of time to spend it? Or do we have to rush at the very end of the fiscal year and buy backpacks and pencils and all sorts of things that are nice, but we don't necessarily need in that amount or at that moment in time? So I don't know if folks have questions. I'll kind of field these from the chat here and I'll read them out loud, or you can, Tom. Let's see. I see a nice note from Heath looks like Heath Mello had to step away. All right, Elaine, you had a question, I think. Tom, did you respond to that one? Elaine from Kansas earlier, information on the maintenance of effort requirements for Gear 2 funding. Did you respond specifically to that?
I haven't been able to respond to that, but I'm sending the department. I received the email about that, and that's going to be included in the list of questions to the department. So I want to get a clear sense from them about how they want to approach the maintenance of effort requirements. I had heard, with the gear funds, that goes back to the 2020 packages.
Yeah.
And I know the Trump administration had said how they were going to approach that, but I don't know right now with the Biden administration how they are going to approach maintenance of effort, when they're going to make the calculations, any of that. So we just don't have a good sense from them about how they want to approach MOE.
Thank you. We have a question from Wisconsin, Monique Curry, who's with the Technical College System. Wouldn't the maintenance of effort requirements negate any efforts to use federal provisions for lost revenue to backfill for state budget cuts?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So the maintenance of effort requirements would, negate efforts to use the federal provisions for the lost revenue to backfill for state budget cuts. So yeah. I'm trying to go through this as well, but the maintenance of effort requirements. I'm gonna have to go through this. And I'll provide more information on that. But
Monique, Monique's on, Tom. Monique, do you have any follow-up or any clarifications for Tom? Or, I mean, I know we can follow up with you, but anything else?
Sorry, I've got so many buttons to unclick. Yeah, so I thought you'd said earlier in terms of lost revenue, you'd been receiving questions and you were unsure if lost revenue, you could use the lost revenue provisions to backfill for state budget cuts. That's what
that wasn't included in the list, and I just wanted to get clarification on that.
Because it seems like you wouldn't be able to do it if they have these maintenance of effort provisions. That would sort of be undercutting that. Okay, thank you.
Yep. So I just want to, I just wanted to clarify with them about where they're at on that. Yep.
Great.
Anybody else? Questions for Tom?
Tom,
Randy Furlak from the great state of Nebraska, all right?
if you had an institution that refunded money for their dorm and food services because the distance learning had clicked in, is the 50% of the HEAP funds, then would that count toward that 50% that's used for students?
The student ones, again, we're want to get clarification on this, but the student ones have been traditionally cash grants to students. So that is not considered something where that to me, with the refunds and things like that, that I think would be part of the institutional aid. But I'll try to get clarification on that.
Okay.
But yeah, they in the past with the student grants that they've wanted those to be separate of anything else. But I will double check on that.
Now, the second question is there's a provision you don't drop taxation or pension plans in this, but if you had property tax relief, which is a big issue here in Nebraska, is that, are we penalized or not?
Right. I will have to double check on that. That could be a matter of going back to the guidance that the Treasury Department will put out. I am sure that there'll be a lot of questions because there's so much money at stake, and there's so many unique circumstances in the states as far as pensions, as taxes, and the like. That the Department of Treasury will put out guidance as far as what the parameters are exactly on taxes.
Okay, thank you.
More questions for Tom from any of our policymakers or higher ed leaders or staff?
And thank you for the note, Sarah, about the 90-10 loophole. That's been a priority of the higher education community for many years, is trying to get that loophole closed. And we want to make sure that there's no incentives for predatory behavior toward veterans, military, or any other students for that matter. So that was a big win for the higher education community.
Tom, one of the things I was wondering about, we have some states whose sessions have already completed, and those that will keep, continue and are still in full swing. I mean, how for states in particular where their sessions have ended, I'm thinking South Dakota, what's the best way, as these changes are coming down the pike, for them to stay apprised and, be able to, I suppose, call a special session or something to come back together. But are there some good resources for folks that they can consult? Yeah,
I would say for especially for state legislators, I would work with your contacts at the National Conference of State Legislatures. They've had several very good resources. I'm putting one into the chat bar right now with a breakdown of the American Rescue Plan. So I would work through NCSL, or if those who work with the governor's office. I know NGA, National Governors Association, has been very active and involved with that. And certainly, Susan, I'm happy to share, any information that I have onto you, and make sure that that I can share that with MEC, and that's available as well.
Great. I think what we'll be able to do is on our website, we'll have a place where we'll provide, some of these resources and change those out as the information becomes available. And of course, you've been so great about making yourself available if there are questions, even one-off questions and things like that. But I think folks are going to be really interested in kind of is there going to be more detail with respect to the waiver process? I remember when I worked in Washington I'm dating myself, back in the 90s, I worked on the Labor Committee on the Senate side for our senator. And there were some very creative, and I mean that in a good way, things that could be done with waivers. And so it'll be interesting to see if there's some additional direction that's provided with respect to waivers.
Yeah, it's unclear right now how if Secretary Cardona is going to have a more generous approach or if he's going to say, states have to, maintain their funding, and I'm not going to offer any waivers. It could be any waivers, or it could be a very generous approach. We will have to see. But again, the previous two packages said that he could do it for states with precipitous declines, but for this one, it's a lot weaker. I know traditionally this has been a battle between the higher education community and the Governors Association. The higher education community has called for very strong maintenance of effort requirements, such as what we had during the stimulus package back in 09 and 10. But the National Governors Association has certainly been on the other side, saying that governors need flexibility in with their budgets. So we'll have to just wait and see how they implement that and what approach they take.
What do you think the time frame is on this, kind of as this information that's coming down the pike? I mean, I know, we got a fairly new administration and they're still even staffing up the department. What do you see as sort of the time frame for this?
Right. I would just say that, yeah, you're absolutely right with the staffing, that they're hiring new, they're political hires. There's some people that I know the Undersecretary of Education, he's still waiting Senate confirmation. So they're still bringing their team on. I know they're working as hard as they can to try to get that information and get the guidance out as quickly as they can. And they've been very great with responding to emails and questions about the implementation of the law. So they're working hard there, and they've been pretty responsive to our questions. But some of these require consulting with the general counsel's office, with the undocumented and DACA students. Of course, that requires coordination with the Department of Justice. So there's a fair amount of hurdles in some cases for them to go through in order to get a good answer to us back.
Thanks, Tom. Other questions for Tom?
And I can just put into the chat bar right now so you can see the for your particular state, the breakdown for the allocations that you will receive for both public and proprietary institutions of higher education. This money will be available until September 30th of 2023.
That's great. And
So
that's a longer period of time.
They've given an extended runway with that, which is very good. I know there were some concerns with one of the earlier packages about, as you brought up, some states having to spend money by the end of the year and spending it in ways that didn't deliver value for taxpayers. So this provides an extended runway to use those funds, both with the aid directly to institutions of higher education, as well as the aid to state and local governments.
Thanks, Tom. Any other burning questions or non-burning questions? We'll keep you posted, but for Tom, before we.
Happy to answer any questions, or, if anyone wants to talk about the Packers, I'm always happy to talk about the Packers as well, always. So.
Representative Murphy likes to talk about the Packers.
Of course.
Well, I was going to ask Tom a question, but when I found out he picked the Badgers in the NCAA tournament, I thought, geez, I don't know if this guy really is going to be able to.
His judgment is not very good. So, yeah, I'm at the very, very bottom of the office pool right now. I know Rob's on the call here. I think the all the team members of SHIO are far, far above me in my brackets.
Your
So
heart's in the right place.
my heart's in the right place. It's just that,
I actually do have one question though.
Yep.
So, the original CARES money went out to the states. The governors were given pretty much total control over that money. Legislators in the states are starting to feel a little bit left behind here. Are we going to have much say going forward in any of this other money? Or is it gonna be it's the same
yeah.
thing?
I will have to check on how much, because it just says, the law is pretty general. It's there to help states, counties, and cities and tribal governments. But I know with some of the money, the governor's education fund, I know just by the name, it went directly to governors. But I will have to check on that and see, if what opportunities are there from the legislative branch to weigh in on how that, because there's so much money at stake, and what opportunities that they have to help shape the priorities of spending this money, because it is fairly open-ended, with the exception of the pension and tax cuts. So you'd want to see input from the legislative branch as well.
Mhm.
So I can reach out to my colleagues at NCSL and see what, and I'll circle back with you, Susan, about what opportunities there will be for the legislative branch.
That'd be great.
Yep.
Thanks. Anybody else? All right. Thank you to all of you and to Tom. Like I said, we'll record the session. And I think what we'll do is we'll also sort of through social media, break up, some of this, provide some of the slides, etc. We'll make Tom's slides available later on and probably embed some of this information in a newsletter, as well as make it available on our website. I just want to express my gratitude to you, Tom. We don't have kind of a series that's focused necessarily on finance, but I think this fits in well with some work we've been doing that was supported by the Lumina Foundation, that's looking at how do you help states and systems in higher ed figure out navigating, life post-COVID, and how do you, what do you hold on to? What do you do more of? What do you do less of? And are there some strategies and approaches that make sense? So stay tuned for that. That's coming in April, early May. But with that, Tom, I just want to express our gratitude to you. Thank you again for speaking to our folks, and thanks to all of you.
Yep. And I put my email in the chat bar. Feel free to reach out if you have any follow-ups. And again, thank you for the invitation, Susan. Always
You
a pleasure.
bet, of course.
Right.
Thanks,
Have a good
Tom.
day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.